good afternoon, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. We had some fascinating presentations this morning, a lot to sort of chew over on the whole thing. What we're going to do this afternoon is look at some of the defining trends that are shaping the industry, of what's actually happening out there, where it might go. Our first speaker is Mitra, MD Contextual Banking and Embedded Finance for Deutsche Bank. And what Dee wants to talk about is banking as a service, but unusually taking the bank's perspective for once. So, Dee, over to you.
Okay. So I'm just going to see that this works. It does. Okay. So thank you, Mark, for that introduction. What I'm going to focus on is, given that I've had few years in the embedded finance banking as a service space, I've been working at it, and I'm really excited to share some of my insights and experience with you today. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into it. What's embedded finance? Because we've heard about, I think, a couple of talks in the morning as well on this term. It's doing quite a lot of rounds, and what it means to me. So for me, having witnessed the power that embedded finance can actually be used to transform the way customer experience in the banking world, I think for me that's the thing that attracts me most to when we say embedded finance as a term. Now, if you think about our daily lives and how we use financial services in our daily life as just private individuals, when you hail a ride, you don't think about payment as a separate service or separate thing that you're doing. It's a part of the experience of the app. The same thing if you buy something from an e-commerce marketplace or a website, again, a payment as well as financing the purchase. I'm sure you guys have heard about buy now, pay later or some of those products. It's all integrated within the experience, right? So this is not, again, a trend or hype or something that's coming. It's happening today to us. We don't even realize that it's there. And I think we're going to see more of this, right? And it's the right time for me to start thinking about how this could impact the B2B sector. So we see this quite a lot in the B2C world, but what that means for a business community, that's where the kind of interesting part for me is. Now, it's not a new topic. I've heard a few people tell me that we've had these technological innovations in the past in financial services. It's a hype, it might go down. But if you think about it, this is not a new concept. Embedded finance is the demand for having connected financial services when and where you need it. And in the past, we've had cases where we would deliver this as a branded card or even white-labeled offerings. And today, we are talking about embedded finance. So what's new? Why is this such an important topic today? I think the seamlessness of the user experience, that's what is the newness here. And the ability to share data safely and securely, financial data, between different platforms. And when you put those two things together, you're really talking about unprecedented opportunities in terms of new solutions, new markets, new platforms. And that's why I think embedded finance is picking up as a trend in itself, needs a focus area there. And of course, we've talked about payments, we've talked about finance, but what about more complex financial products? And this is why I mentioned early on that the innovation started in the B2C market, and I think it needs to start reflecting in the B2B area. Okay, so Mark introduced me, and he said banking as a service, right? So what is the role of a bank or a financial institution, or regulated financial institutions for that matter, in order to enable embedded finance to take place? Enter the word banking as a service. And as a service, to me, always reflects, it's the English term for a very technical term called APIs, in my mind, right? So I think banks have the expertise in the risks and regulatory space, and whether you are serving the financial product through a non-financial app, i.e. a marketplace or a rideshare app, the responsibility, the regulatory responsibility is still with the bank, right? So bank's role has to be an enabler here. They have to understand what does this new world mean in terms of regulatory responsibilities. What does the risk framework mean in order to make this happen? And then, of course, they need to ensure that these financial integrations are secure and compliant. This responsibility remains with the bank. But this is where it gets interesting for me. I don't think banks should just be the enablers. I think given the fact that we enjoy customers' trust, and trust in this day and age is not just a value, it's a competitive advantage, as well as the fact that we understand customers' pain points, where they have automation challenges, where they have decision challenges. I think if you put that together with the scalability and distribution capability of embedded finance, you're really talking about new revenue streams, new ways of solving problems, age-old problems, that you can't just wait for software companies or non-financial brands or even fintechs to solve. So how do we do this? And for me, this is a multi-year, multi-pronged approach, which definitely starts with investing in a digital foundation, strong digital foundation. So if a bank hasn't invested already in public cloud infrastructure, I would definitely say that would be the first step. Think about this. You're trying to integrate your products and services into other companies' websites or front end. How on earth are you going to do that if you do not have a web-based public cloud infrastructure? It's going to be that much more harder. Secondly, APIs, more APIs. As banks, we need to invest in opening up services, and not just internally between systems, i.e. system-to-system communication, but we need to start thinking about how we can externalize this in a way that third-party developers can easily use them without having to pick up the phone and call a bank, i.e. call center mode. Thirdly, digital consent mechanism, right? So if you're talking about sharing data between platforms, which is, in my view, the crux of it all. If you can't share data, financial data, then I think embedded finance will just be a term, and then, yeah, those people who are saying it's a hype, it will remain a hype. So if you're sharing data, then traditional banks in the B2B sector, again, need to invest in creating those capabilities which allow customers to authorize their corporate bank to release their financial data to a non-financial brand of their choice. And this needs to be done safely and securely. And again, as I said before, if we have all these capabilities, then why stop there? Let's think about new ecosystem solutions, new automation solutions. And that brings me to the heart of it all. And I'm not saying for once that banks do it all alone. We do it with fintechs. We do it with software companies. There has to be a collaboration here. But at the same time, rather than playing the back-end service provider role alone, what we can focus on is creating amazing user experience, something I'm quite passionate about, make financial services and consuming financial services fun. A real use case from the world of corporate banking and treasury. Treasury is a very complicated function. It's a very specialized function. And if you think about a large company, a medium company, however complex the company is, the treasury's job is to look at their entire data set, entire processes, and then make financial decisions, whether they are risk decisions, investment decisions, liquidity decisions. And all of their data is either in their CRM systems or their ERP systems, their collections process, their banking systems, accounting systems. None of that problem area is solved. And I believe these are the areas where banking as a service through APIs, open data, can effectively streamline payment processes, as an example. But why just that? Think about new platforms, new solutions, which kind of creates and automates some of these financial processes for our customers, for the Treasury Department, so that they can make the decision at the right time with the right information. So, unfortunately, with anything new or anything innovative, it's not without challenges, without considerations. Tailoring a financial product to go and then be served in multiple different non-financial platforms, this is not an easy task. You're suddenly leaving the boundaries of traditional banking infrastructure or channels. How do you govern those channels? Does your risk framework need to evolve? And unfortunately, there is no rule book. So you'll have to jump into it, and then you have to learn the good from the bad. Secondly, in spite of open banking innovations, these innovations have resulted in a lot of good data sharing capabilities in the B2C sector, i.e. you can link your account, for example, and authorize your bank to share your financial data with your pension advice app, for example. But this kind of digital consent capability is still very much lacking in the large customer sector. The data for those customers still remain locked up. So again, that's another challenge that we need to start thinking about as banks and financial institutions. How do we offer them such services? Legacy infrastructure investment, something that is, every bank is doing that, every traditional company is doing that. So you're constantly up against a moving target. And let's not forget about culture, skills, and mindset. We're talking about bringing together SMEs from the corporate banking community with years of banking experience with tech-savvy digital product developers and individuals. How do they co-innovate, coexist without being threatened or misunderstood, and so that they can work together to deliver these innovations? And then finally, for me, we are not creating just another technological product. What we are doing is creating a new market. How do you monetize some of these services, some of these products going forward in the future? And how do you create a brand identity as a tech services, tech product provider, as a bank, right? These things become important. And last but not the least, you're asking some behavioral changes from your clients, from your customers as well. Because if you're building new platforms, do they sit on top of all of their old platforms? Are you asking them to replace those platforms? All these questions need to be answered in order for this to become mainstream. So, future outlook. Now, even today, and in general, I hear and I see a mosaic of technologies, new technologies hitting the financial services sector, whether it is AI, Gen AI is a hot topic, blockchain, crypto. But I still see a lot of technology-centric investments happening, i.e., let's use AI to solve problem A. Let's use, crypto is a world in itself, to solve problem B. But the question that I would like to solve is, can you pull some or all of these technologies together to solve one problem? The reason for that is real problems are seldom this black and white or categorical that I'm only going to be solved by AI. When you're thinking about real problems, they kind of cross boundaries of technologies. So I would definitely like to see that happen, and I think that will happen. I can't say this enough. I do invite banks to share their to create APIs and allow their customers to kind of share their data, so more APIs are required, especially in the B2B community. And my personal perspective is banks can do more than just be a participant. They can create new ecosystems, new markets, and they need to do that in order for banking as a service and embedded finance to reach its true potential. So in conclusion, I do believe that the future is embedded. It's not a passing trend. It is collaborative. But there's a lot of moving parts, and we need to work together in order to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dee. Now, as ever, there will be a chance to ask questions of any of the speakers this afternoon at the end of the sessions, once they've all spoken. Teana Baker-Taylor is Vice President, Policy and Regulatory Strategy for Circle. And an intriguing title of the talk, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So, Teana, over to you.
Sorry, do you still have the clicker?
Oh, no.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, I'm Teana. I'm going to try and give you a look through into where we are in the crypto space through the lens of what's happening in digital asset regulation. But before I do that, can you just raise your hand if you know what crypto is? Good, okay. And raise your hand if you've ever bought or owned any type of crypto. Great, okay. And raise your hand if you own any crypto now. Okay, pretty consistent, good. I saw that, Glenn. Okay, great. It's just always helpful to know who I'm talking to. So I'm from Circle. Circle is a financial market infrastructure company predominantly. We do issue two assets. They are called stablecoins. Actually, that's what most people call them. We call them digital currencies or tokenized cash. We have two in the market today. USDC is the second largest fiat-backed stablecoin, and Eurocoin, which launched last year. But Circle has been around for about 10 years. And has been an ecosystem and platform builder in that space during that time. So if we jump back, I'm going to age myself a little bit because I went through the dot-com boom in private equity and was responsible for working on deal teams that launched some of these IPOs and some of these early companies. But we started to see in the early 2000s these firms coming to market that we know today as to be unicorns, but that were really kind of technology-led, providing other types of services, whether those be around communication, entertainment, mobility, for example, with Tesla. And from that, e-commerce emerged. And so kind of the early evolution of embedded finance. We started to be able to pay for things online, and that was new. And with that came a lot of new business cases, new types of products and services to be sold, new companies, and certainly a greater understanding of how value and information moves across the internet. Then came 2008, and I think we all in this room know what happened then. We had a financial market meltdown, which caused the birth of something called Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin was the first real cryptocurrency, and it was originally designed to be a payments mechanism, typically for me to be able to pay for you and I to be able to transact. And the idea behind this was that we had a lot of kind of counterparty risk within the banking system, and it could not be relied upon to be trusted, to not be hypothecated, and to really enable a store of value. So Bitcoin is born, and most financial regulators don't pay much attention for a while. Now, this is an old chart from a fairly old report, but I think it's still very poignant because we're able to kind of see the progression of the attention that regulators were paying to this technology, as well as kind of the dips in when they were. Normally at this point, I have a really cool data visualization, but it was broken, and I didn't want to risk it not working, so I didn't include it. But a couple things to note when you kind of look at this chart. So in 2013, Ethereum was born, and that was the second real major cryptocurrency or digital asset. And by the end of 2023, there were around 50 other cryptocurrencies. And so you can see, like, nothing, there's really low interest from the regulatory and government community until 2013, because there's this pop, there's this explosion of crypto assets. By April 2017, that number was 789, so a real explosion. Today, we have around 23,000 different tokens. And those tokens do a variety of different things and serve different use cases. But you can start to see why regulators got interested. All of a sudden, there's this, cataclysmic explosion of different types of token offerings, different types of use cases, and all around the world, regulators kind of woke up to this. And so this gives you a snapshot. I prepared this slide for a talk, this particular slide, for a talk last July. And so last July, I'm talking about these really positive trends in regulators and governments paying attention to the need to put kind of rules in the road in place, primarily for consumers, but equally for those businesses who are looking for regulatory clarity to be able to understand what they can do, what jurisdictions they can do it in, and really operate as good actors. And unbeknownst, or you wouldn't know this from reading some of the press that you see sometimes, because good headlines don't really sell newspapers. But the majority of people in this space are good actors. They're trying to provide embedded financial services. They're trying to unbundle payments from a fractional banking system that carries a lot of counterparty risk. So what happens next? So if anybody's been watching this space, you know that we had two major things happen. In mid last year, we had what my boss likes to term as crypto Theranos. So essentially, this is the disaster known as the Terra Luna collapse. Terra Luna, we refer to the founder as Crypto Theranos because what he was purporting to do and what Terra Luna was purporting to do was not actually real. It was marketed as a potential stablecoin, but really was more like a crypto derivative, and it caused a massive loss of value. And then we fast forward a couple months, and Crypto Thanos happened. So that's Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX. If anybody in the room doesn't know what happened with FTX, essentially we lost $2 trillion in value in the crypto asset market due to fraud. So that caused regulators to really wake up. And we've seen a global attention from standard bodies globally, BIS, FSB, the IMF, essentially the G20, most recently in India, suggesting to global regulators that we need to approach this problem or this challenge and this innovation and all of the use cases and potential risks that come from a shift in the way that we transfer value with a more global mindset. So over the course of the last year, this just gives you a snapshot of what's happening around the world. And a lot of these things are incredibly positive, and some of them, could be considered less so. In this country specifically, we've had fantastic legislation passed in July, and we're starting to see that legislation come into force. In some parts, the financial promotions legislation, for one, very quickly came into effect. The other major part of the Financial Services and Markets Act of 2023 brings stablecoins into the regulated perimeter. That's been a little slower for the consultations and the regulatory regime to come out, but we wait with bated breath. But this gives you an idea of all around the world, regulators are looking at this. And so coming back to the good, the bad, and the ugly, I just want to give you an idea of what's happening where. So the good. So despite these losses, despite the bad actors, we have had a number of jurisdictions that are really focused on comprehensive rulemaking and enabling this technology to flourish and thrive within some guardrails. And so who are those? Most of you in the room may know that the Markets and Crypto Asset Framework, otherwise known as MiCA, or MiCA if you're American, it comes into force in two stages next year. The first, in July, will bring stablecoins into the regulated perimeter. Those are, again, fiat-backed stablecoins, so one-to-one for a fiat currency. And by the end of next year, the rest of the crypto asset space will come into the regulated perimeter. So this provides a lot of clarity for those firms that are building. It provides a trading block of 27 member countries, which is incredible if you're looking to launch a product. And it really is set itself up to be a competitiveness attractor to Europe. Japan, Singapore, and Hong Kong have also come out with very comprehensive regulatory frameworks. Japan was the first, and they continue to iterate. So they have recently brought stablecoins into the regulated perimeter as well. Their regulatory framework came into effect for stablecoins in July of this year. And we've seen a real shift from jurisdictions like Hong Kong, who were hesitant a couple of years ago and now are approaching this from a very competitive perspective. So, moving on to the bad. Crypto has legacy negative connotations, and I think those are very dated. I think today we're seeing a number of use cases which are materially useful. Things like Circle's USDC is being used by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees to transmit disaster and displaced person funds to those affected by the war in Ukraine. It's immediate, it's fast, there's no leakage or slippage from delivering pallets of cash. That's just one use case. And so the countries that aren't embracing this, I think, are potentially going to suffer some economic competitiveness challenges. So who are they? The US is still lagging behind. It's a major market. There's a lot of innovation. centered in the United States, and the United States still struggles to get their arms around how and what they want to regulate. We've had some positive things happen this year. A bill recently passed the House Financial Services Committee and will go to the floor to bring stablecoins to the regulated perimeter. But again, the clock is running down this year, and Congress resets next year. So we, again, wait with bated breath. And unfortunately, the UK, as I said, instead of taking that holistic approach, the UK is looking at regulating activities by activities. And in some ways that's positive, but we've seen in this country, great announcements from the government, and then maybe not a quick follow-up from, potentially Treasury to put those things in place. And at the heart of that, I think, is a very hardworking FCA that's trying to keep up with the industry, but doesn't always have the authority to act. So that's not great. And then there's the ugly. And so in a industry that is heavily dominated by cult of personality, there's a reason that people like Crypto Thanos and Crypto Theranos were able to build the wealth and the operations that they were able to do without a lot of scrutiny or governance around them. It then leads to those countries where my boss likes to call it the Game of Thrones mentality, where regulators either can't get their arms around what they're going to do, or governments can't get their arms around what they want to do, talking about bans, and really this idea that we're going to prevent this technology from thriving. It's here. It's going to continue to grow. And so the answer to all of this, I think, going back to what I said at the beginning about the G20, is this harmonization that the industry, and I think that our governments are looking for and demanding now. These assets and this technology is global. It moves around the world. A lot of the time it's permissionless in its nature around the smart contract usage. And so when we're looking through the lens of regulation and kind of same risk, same regulatory outcome, I think we also need to be very cognizant that a lot of companies are global in their deployment of these assets and this technology, and really start thinking about things like equivalence and reciprocity, and having those governments and regulators talk to each other more and try and find common solutions that benefit the industry. And equally, the industry needs to talk to their governments and regulators more so that they can better understand the risks and opportunities. So that's me, and I hope I did that in the amount of time that I had, and look forward to your questions.
The third speaker this afternoon is Michael Speed, VP Development of Broadridge, and Michael wants to talk us through a new product they've developed using generative AI. So, Michael.
Thanks, Mark. This afternoon, as Mark mentioned, I'm going to talk about BondGPT and how we built this innovative product in 30 days using generative AI. So I think before we kick off, I'm looking for another show of hands, some audience participation. Who knows what LLMs and generative AI is? How many people in the room are actually using it in projects or at work at the moment? And how many people have released a product using generative AI? Okay, again, it's good to know the audience, so thank you. So some introductions. I'm Michael Speed. I'm the VP of Development at Broadridge. I look after the fixed income technology group within capital markets there. There's a picture of me from lockdown. If you don't take anything else away from this talk, it is never let your kids cut your hair. As I say, I work for Broadridge. Broadridge are not that well known within the UK. They're a global fintech, about 4 billion revenue annually, part of the S&P 500. They generally focus on technology, communication, analytics solutions for large financial institutions. And lastly, an introduction to LTX. LTX is a business unit within Broadridge. They focus on analytics and e-trading for corporate bond traders. They use AI and some innovative protocols to increase liquidity and execution within the market. So what is BondGPT?
LTX, a Broadridge company building on OpenAI GPT-4, is unlocking the elusive corporate bond market, simplifying access to pre-trade insights, and leveraging our liquidity cloud, vastly improving price and liquidity discovery, all in the palm of your hand. Introducing BondGPT. Now, institutional users can identify tradable corporate bonds using a generative AI application that will enhance price and liquidity discovery while fueling trading through automated chat. With BondGPT, you can use natural language to search for bond-related queries, leverage LTX's patent-pending bond similarity technology, see accurate, real-time data, and view dynamic charting and graphing. Like the best of generative AI, BondGPT replaces hours of research and extensive data visualizations across many platforms and screens with a simple, comprehensive UI available on your mobile phone or desktop. A cutting-edge addition to our bond trading platform, BondGPT makes a vast, opaque, fragmented market more accessible, revealing new opportunities to traders. And this is just the beginning. There's much more to come. Trade smarter. LTX, a Broadridge company.
Okay, so that was BondGPT. So BondGPT came from three things. The first one was LTX. It's an underlying platform that I mentioned. The key thing about LTX is that it has key data sets and some interesting functionality, such as tens of thousands of bond details. It has a bond similarity model, it has liquidity information, and it also has analytics on dealer selection. So this is the second takeaway of the day. If you're going to do some generative AI, it's all about the data. The data is the secret sauce of any solution that you're going to have. So it's definitely the key thing you need to look at. The second piece is OpenAI GPT-4. It's the LLM model. This was a part of the solution that allowed us to have a natural language front end that produce all of this data back to the dealer. So this was really the innovation that allowed us to put this innovative UI in place and surface all of the data up. OpenAI and GPT-4 is a large language model. It's trained with data before September 2012, which we'll come on to later. And it's also what powers ChatGPT. And lastly, mobile. So probably the mobile part of BondGPT is more gimmicky. The important thing is, because of the natural language technology, we managed to get the form factor or our UI down in such a small space. And that was really important because bond traders require a lot of real estate for the work that they're doing, so the less real estate you can take up with your application, the more powerful it's going to be for them. So these three things are really the key aspects that allowed us to create BondGPT. Before diving into BondGPT, a little bit about working with large language models. There's three of the ways you can interact with them. The first is prompt engineering. So that's around crafting the set of instructions or questions to the model that allows you to get the right answers or the answers you want back from the LLM. The good things about that is it's relatively inexpensive and it's very flexible. You can use prompt engineering to get different answers or different behaviors out of the model. The downside is you can only access data that the model was trained on. And as I mentioned, GPT-4 was only trained up till September 2021, which is no good for bonds that have been traded in the last 3 years. The other limitation is the limited token window. So the token window is the amount of information you can push in your prompt or you get back from the model as a response. So that's very limited if you're using a prompt engineering approach. The next approach is to use model fine-tuning. So this is where you take a model, public model, and you layer your own information or data on top of that using an API. That then becomes more specific to your domain, and it creates a private model that you can use. The benefits of that is it gives you more accurate and contextually relevant responses. The data is also up to date. The downside is these models are massive, and it takes a large amount of your own data to tune one of these things and train it for it to be effective and recognize your data. It's also computationally expensive. It costs a lot of money to train these models and run them, and you have to do it on a frequent basis to keep everything up to date. The last method of interacting with LLMs is called embedding. This is when you use something called a vector database You create a vector database by reading all of your own documents, and then before you send a prompt to the LLM, you read the vector database, which pulls back data that's similar to your prompt, and it passes that back down into the LLM, so actually injecting your data into the model. Again, this gives you more accurate or contextually relevant data, also up-to-date data, as long as you keep your vector database up to date. But the downside is you get out of vocabulary words. So you may have words in your vector database that the model doesn't recognize, and it can make incorrect linkages between them. Also, the storage and computation of vector databases can be quite expensive as well. And also, you need quite a lot of technology and understanding to do these things. One more thing before I talk about BondGPT and how we built it is looking at the downside, the risks of generative AI. The first of these is hallucinations. So LLMs can produce information that may seem factual, but is not. So an example of this is you may ask a model, give me 3 cities in the US, and it may say New York, San Francisco, and Toronto. So if you're not good at geography, you may just take that answer and believe it's correct, but the model's giving you factually incorrect information because it's created linkages and semantics based on other information that's incorrect based on the question you've given it. Another problem is algorithmic bias. The model will be biased based on whatever data you supply that. So if you have biased data that you're using to train that model, or that has been used to train that model, then it may result in prejudicial or harmful content, which is going to be a disaster for your business. The third is IP or legal. There's several ongoing lawsuits about the legal ownership of content generated by LLMs. One of those is with Microsoft and their code generation called Copilot. There's people who have created software that Copilot's been trained on, who are now suing Microsoft, saying that the content of anything generated by their Copilot tool is partly owned by them because it was trained on their data. There's also the privacy problem. If you train a model or pass in data to your model, whether it's your own data, company data, personal data, there's a risk that that could be retrieved unnecessarily or unwantedly through queries or other means. And that brings us on to the last piece, which is cybersecurity. There's new and old attack vectors exposed through LLMs. People can use prompt injection to try and overcome your guardrails or to get some of this private data out of your model. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is a little bit about why we picked the method we did for BondGPT. So we took the prompt engineering approach, but with a twist. So I've got a high-level design of the solution here. How it works is the user or the bond trader will pass in their query in natural language, as you saw in the video, into BondGPT. We then pass that to a compliance engine that checks what they've asked for validity, make sure there's nothing in there that's insecure or they're trying to spoof us in some way. We then take that information if it's okay and we augment it with additional data and pass that to the LLM. And this is really the secret sauce of BondGPT. What we're passing in is a way to query our data stores underneath. So this is proprietary information on how our data is structured. The LLM then takes the natural language and creates queries from that. So essentially it's natural language to SQL based on the user's intention. That then gets passed down from BondGPT in a selection of queries into our data stores from LTX. And then before we return that to the user, we then do another check for compliance to make sure that we're not sending anything back that's incorrect. And what we've managed to do here is create a system that allows traders to get a whole load of information that would normally take them tens of minutes, hours to do in seconds, saving vast amount of time. And we've done this in a way that we've still maintained their security and privacy, and reasonably cheaply because we're not going to the high expense of training these models. And this was done probably in 30 days by 2 people. So even within those 30 days, I would say 25% of the time was functionality, the other 75% was on compliance and making sure that we met policies. And this was to get to a beta. We spent about another 2 months after that really making sure this was secure. But again, it just shows that with a little bit of innovation, some good data, and the power of generative AI, you can really be innovative very quickly. So I'd say, in summary, LLMs and generative AI present a huge opportunity. However, they also present some significant risks that you've really got to be aware of. So I would say that's the third takeaway of today, is be aware of the risks if you're looking at any AI solutions, and generative AI in particular. And lastly, data is your secret sauce. It is going to be your differentiator. It will create a USP that other people can't copy. So, message before leaving is innovate, but do it carefully. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Dan Bibas, is General Manager International for Public. And now, what he wants to talk about, there was an interesting example of this morning in one of the breakouts. I think it was Sonia Schulenberg was talking about an AI-assisted investment system which performed rather well. So, Dan's going to be talking about the rise of AI-assisted investment. Dan, over to you.
Good afternoon. I was told I was the only one that submitted Google Slides, so let's hope nothing breaks. Again, my name is Dan Bibas. I'm the General Manager of Public's international business. We'll learn a little bit about Public, a little bit about my role, and most importantly, we'll talk today about a topic that is surely top of mind and one that Michael just touched on too, which is not only AI, but more closely than the investment industry. What does that look like, especially when we think about retail customers? Before we begin, though, I have a note courtesy of my wonderful compliance colleagues. So, quick reminder, I rarely make compliance jokes. I get a few laughs, so I appreciate it. Quick reminder, Public is an investment platform both in the US and the UK. We do not offer any financial advice or any investment advice. We'll be sharing a little bit about an AI tool that we launched in the US. This is not yet available to the UK. And finally, for those that are our members in the US or the UK, a reminder, as always, that capital is at risk. Very good. Good crowd. Okay. Cool. So we can dig in. A little bit about Public. Public launched in the US in 2019. We started off as offering fractional stocks. Remember when that was an innovation? Only 4 years ago. Now it's basically commoditized. But we started off launching fractional stocks in the US. We've grown very quickly from there. We're very proud to say that only 4 years later, we serve millions of members in the United States across a variety of different assets. So that's been a big part of our growth story. And whilst we're here, also worthwhile sharing and resharing some news we've had in the last few weeks. Public has made the UK its first international market outside the US. Our first expansion is here in the UK. Announced only a few weeks ago, so very fresh. Public is starting off by giving its members access to US markets in a way that's more accessible and more affordable. You may have seen us on Bloomberg and CNBC, but again, delighted to be here, and nice to be sharing this as well at the Fintech Summit here in Scotland. So, why am I here talking about AI? I ask myself this question a lot, specifically this morning on my flight. I think the reason why is that actually forums like this are the perfect place to be talking about a new groundbreaking technology, especially nowadays, especially on topics related to technology. Teams are distributed, stakeholders in different offices, different cities. We rarely get a chance to gather as an industry and talk about what is probably the top trend of our time, one that's going to have a deep impact on probably all of our work here the next weeks, months, and most certainly years. So let's dig in. For starters, we're going to be sharing a little bit about what we've learned by launching an AI research tool in the United States. Now, obviously, this is based in the US, but I think some of these learnings are really applicable to the industry, irrespective of geography. So Public launched an AI investment tool called Alpha in the US. This was built on top of ChatGPT-4, which I think even Michael may have mentioned earlier, and I'm sure many of you have played around with. The idea here is to support customers in making more informed decisions. When we say customers, these are retail customers, everyday customers, but surely there are applications for this far across the industry. So I think when we say, how can AI help inform our decisions, I think some of you will have an idea of how this works if you've played with it before, but I think what's incredible here is I was speaking to someone on our team who's much closer to this, and I said, okay, I have a presentation to do. What's one line I can keep in top of my mind so I don't say anything foolish? And he said, at all times, just remember, it's like having a very smart, hardworking investment analyst in your pocket. And that investment analyst doesn't take a coffee break. They don't go out for lunch. They don't ask for a pay rise. They're just there in your pocket, ready to help you. And they collect so much information, are so skilled at gathering that information, that they can actually give you much better help than you might get from a human. Now, that's not entirely true, but let's start with that as a place to get started. So again, here, for some of you that are looking at the screen, you could start with relatively simple queries, and you start to get simple information, and the difficulty level or the complexity can increase. I think here we ask questions about Apple stock. We could ask about earnings, about profit margins. We could ask who their competitors are. This is all information that is available somewhere on a data set, but to the average retail customer, they're not sitting behind their computers hours before every trade. Some do, but most people actually benefit from having information that's more digestible. So I think that's the big promise here, which we're going to touch upon for over the next 10 or so minutes. What are the main benefits? So when I started doing this, there are like 15 benefits, and I wasn't sure which were the top 3, so I asked ChatGPT, what are the top 3? And I kind of agreed with these top 3, so we stuck with it. The first one is the obvious one, which is data-driven insights. I think it touches a lot to what Michael said. This is the obvious use case, which we'll talk about in a second. More data, less barriers, more informed decisions. I think this is the obvious one. One that I think yields a natural, obvious, positive outcome. And we'll go into more detail. Time saving, we're going to walk through a really neat example. An objective perspective. This is, I think, a really interesting one, the third one, and lives in a bit of a gray area, one that's going to require a lot of work to get it right. But all 3 of these things are certainly benefits. So this is the obvious one. When we look at data-driven insights, the idea here is, again, you can gather information from a much wider and greater variety of sources than you ever could, and it's presented to you in a way that you can actually use it. I think Sam Altman, so the sort of godfather of AI at the moment, I think he said something like, AI is what we all wanted the internet to be. So the internet is this wonderful place where we have all this information, but it's actually kind of scattered around, really hard to aggregate and to piece together, especially if you're, again, in our case, working with retail customers who want to make informed investment decisions, but may not have all the tools, resources, skill sets required to gather the information they'd like to have before making an investment decision. So if we look here, we start going into detail, like how have their profits increased in the past few years, and we can actually gather, let's look at the information that's come here. So the interesting thing here is like all of this information is actually available. If you really wanted to, you can go into financial statements, you can go into earnings reports, maybe some of this is available even in publicly listed, information that's available for a publicly listed company. The problem is gathering it, sifting it, analyzing it, maybe flaws in the data that you've identified that you then need to fix. So the sort of amount of data you can collect is phenomenal. We ran a survey for our US members that did use Alpha. 73% said they use it to gain a better understanding of how to analyze an asset. When I saw this stat, I was actually a bit surprised because I was surprised it wasn't 90 to 95%, because I think this is such an obvious, wonderful, helpful use case. Next, time saving. This is my personal favorite, and due to a personal story. I started my career on the trade floor in equities. I'd get in at around 6:30 in the morning, thinking, oh, I hope to God I could just have my coffee before anyone asks me to do anything. By 6:35, I'd have a global head, a managing director, a director saying, hey, we have an 8 a.m. meeting. I need a bit of information. Why did this stock move? What happened last night in Asia? And you start thinking, oh, it's going to take me a few minutes to do this, this, and that. Some of these queries do take minutes. Some of them take hours. Why do they take hours? You have trouble finding the data. You look into reports. You're not sure if you have the right one. Maybe there are inconsistencies in the data. So what we have here in this example is this is absolutely a question I would have gotten. And so this is not actually the most complicated question you could have, but it's also not the simplest one. So what was Apple's gross margin over, I think it was the past 5 quarters? So just about enough that it's not an annual statement, so kind of annoying, whoever, your senior director who asked for that, but it's a question nonetheless. What we have here is, again, none of this is scripted, but you can gather that information. That took 23 seconds. So even we spoke about investment analysts before, the most skilled, competent, hardest working, who arrives at the office at 5 a.m. cannot do this in 23 seconds. No way. So time saving here is really remarkable. Objective perspective. So everyone did this show of hands exercise. I didn't do it. Who here has heard of Mad Money? Okay. I need to do a second question now. Who here has made an investment based off a Jim Cramer recommendation? Okay, so this is a savvy crowd. So this kind of drives me mad, is that across the investment industry, you have all these newsletters and these shows and these pundits, none of which will say that they're giving advice, but will give just about enough recommendations and suggestions on big enough of a platform that they do actually impact the investment decisions of other people. Little do we know, Jim Cramer has tens of millions of dollars across his own portfolios. Do we know if he's pushing a stock that he's just invested or not? We have no way of finding out. We usually find out 6 months later. He was either terribly wrong, or the one time he got it right, it was his biggest position. But I think the interesting thing here is when we talk about an objective perspective is AI tools do not have an emotional bias. It's not a financial advisor who maybe owned Apple stock 10 years ago and felt they got burnt on a given stock. And so that's sort of, whether consciously or not, that sits with them when they're speaking with you. That's a simple example. There are also human prejudices in how someone might look at a company or the profile of a business or a sector, et cetera, that might impact their investment advice or recommendations or information that they're providing. But I think my favorite one here is that, again, when we look at alpha and we look at the impact this can have in our industry, it's really about how do you help customers make more informed decisions, right? So as a customer, it's still your money, it's still your investment, it's still your portfolio. That's your decision to make. But how can we use these tools to help support more informed decision making? And so the last point here is also my favorite, because a tool like alpha or other tools that probably have sprung up and are sure to spring up in our industry, can collect information from a much wider variety of sources. So even a really trusted journalist, when they're writing an article, they might only have time to sense check across 2 or 3 sources. I think alpha for any given query, and again, this is relatively early, probably goes through dozens of sources if it needs to. More sources means more balanced delivery of information. So again, back to providing, helping customers make more informed decisions. More sources, more balanced information, and we think that creates a better outcome for customers. I apologize if anyone here is related to Jim Cramer or a big fan. Cool. So in short, I think a quick breather, I think where we see the benefits and the positives of AI tools like Alpha, and we've seen this firsthand, is, it's more. More information, less time, more information, less hassle, more information, less barriers. So we say, it's fast, digestible, and accessible. I think the last one, accessible, one thing that I've discovered with this is when we say accessible, it's not simply, oh, I'm too lazy to do research and it's really neat to have something that will give you an answer in 23 seconds. We underestimate sometimes how in order to make, complete decisions, complete research, some people have the skill set to do so, some do not. Some will open up a spreadsheet and just have a blast on a Sunday morning thinking about a company they enjoy, they want to invest in or not invest in and make those decisions. Some people want to do that research, maybe don't have the skill set. Some people may have access to data sets through their work or are willing to spend that money in order to have those data sets. Others feel it's not quite justified as part of their investment journey to start subscribing to different data sets. So I think more accessible is probably the one that I think has the highest impact. And I think is the biggest gap. So fast, digestible, I think is neat. I think accessible is where you really have the significant customer impact. That being said, and this is a theme that comes up in just about any talk or conversation about AI, whenever I speak with people that are much closer to this than I am, I see this. So as you see, most of this presentation is me just copy-pasting things, but I hear that a lot, which is we still have plenty of work to do. I've heard this about a dozen times from people, whether it's entrepreneurs, engineers, policymakers, et cetera. It's not perfect. It's actually far from perfect. So it's extremely powerful, but there are areas that certainly need to improve over time. A few bits, and now let's focus really closely on what needs to be improved within the context of an AI investment tool. For starters, lack of human judgment. So an AI tool like this is really exceptional at helping to make an informed decision in an instance where quantitative data can help inform a decision. There are instances where sometimes historical data is actually not that helpful for a new circumstance. Let's think of let's think of the beginning of the COVID pandemic. In February 2021, there is no data set in the world that can predict how a healthcare crisis and the impact of COVID-19 could have on the stock market. But still, many people had to make informed decisions about what to do with their portfolios. So that's maybe an instant where human judgment, understanding the world around you in the new circumstance, may actually be more helpful than relying on a very quantitative research tool. So there's room to improve there. Michael spoke about this also, but an over-reliance on data and its quality. We spoke a bit about algorithmic biases. But in short, I think it's like a vending machine. You put something in, you get something out. If you have good data coming in, you're more likely to have a good product coming out. I think what's interesting here is we're about to enter a world where we will generate and consume more data than we ever had. And I think there's a lot of work, within a lot of people in this room, whether it's industry, whether it's regulators. How do we, one, generate that data at a greater scale, but also monitor, grade that data, right? Because this is where there's probably the most room for errors or for AI tools to be less effective than they could be. And a lack of emotional intelligence. I think specifically, if we look at AI investment research, especially in the last few years, if we go back to 2021 or 2022, so much market movement was based on market sentiment. So not necessarily irrational, not necessarily based on quantitative data, but based on, we've all seen meme stocks, et cetera, based on people deciding or people aggregating towards a given stock, and for whatever reasons that stock goes up or down. It creates tremendous volatility in a stock, and it's largely based off of emotional intelligence, right? So not necessarily, to my knowledge, AMC and GameStop was not based off of very quantitative research. So that's, again, and the list for this goes on as well, but these are, I think, top 3 that are particularly topical for this audience. So again, I think we talk about million-dollar questions. I think when we talk about AI, this is like a trillion-dollar question. So how do we balance the opportunities with the risks? I'm not the first to ask this question. I'm not the last. Quite frankly, I think this is a group effort. This is one that's not going to be solved today, not going to be solved for years. It will continue to be iterative. There are people in this room that are going to be working on new products with AI. There are people in this room that are going to be working on new guardrails in AI. So one product that's going to land in the hands of a customer and another one for new guardrails to protect that very same customer. So it's very much so going to be an iterative and colossal effort, quite frankly. But I think when we think about AI, it's still so early. So I almost don't like to get prescriptive about how are we going to solve this and how are we going to solve that and have you thought of this use case. We're so early in this journey, especially in our industry, that I think you need to look at the very foundation. And you say, okay, how do we start? How do we set a trajectory? What's the framework, the mindset to get started with this before we getting lost into individual use cases? And I firmly believe, and so is the view at Public, and a lot of our peers, and many in this room, I'm sure, AI tools are only as effective as the outcomes they generate. So if as an industry we are creating and building AI tools because it's a really fun vanity project and looks good on a company newsletter, I'd say stop right there. That's not very helpful. If we're doing it because it's a cool buzzword, absolutely needs to end there. But if we do think that we can use AI tools to generate positive outcomes for customers, that's a really good direction to be headed into. And that makes it then much easier to work on some of the risks and opportunities because it is worthwhile, because we're confident that we're delivering or working to delivering a positive outcome for customers. In short, this is our view at Public. We believe AI tools like Alpha can empower more retail investors to make more informed investing decisions. To us, that's a positive outcome. Therefore, we are optimistic on the future of AI, but needs to be done carefully and with the right guardrails. But we are absolutely optimistic on what it can bring. So that's it for me. Thank you for tuning in. Last, but hopefully not least. And if you have any questions, I'll be sticking around and taking part in the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to ask Glenn Redman, who's the Crypto Assets and Authorizations Manager for the Financial Conduct Authority, to come up and occupy this seat, Glenn. After you. We'll get ourselves organised. There's an opportunity now to ask questions of any of the speakers. You can have any question you like for example, I don't know, why is Jim Cramer not in prison? Sharing a cell with a 300-pound biker called Mabel. Lots of people would like to see that kind of thing. But same rules apply. You can either do it on Slido or you can stick your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. If you identify yourself on the microphone and just let us know where you're from, okay? So, before we begin that, Glenn, do you want to spend a couple of minutes and just give us something of your background? Tell us something about yourself.
Yep, sure, thank you. So I work at the Financial Conduct Authority. I am one of the managers that runs the team that registers firms for crypto asset activities. Have been at the FCA for about 12 years, different teams. Ran the banking team before that gave banking licenses. Ran the M&A team before that. Started my career in equity research, so very sympathetic to the last presentation. And did some options trading in between derivatives.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for that, just for laying that out. Right. Any questions from the floor for a start? Lady there. Again, if you could identify yourself and tell us where you're from.
Hi, I'm Sakshi I'm the Vice President of Technology at Morgan Stanley. So I have a question with Michael around the governance for the compliance for the BondGPT product, what you mentioned. And I'm just curious to know what type of compliance framework it is to make sure it is not breaking any legalities and risk factors for a bank.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, as I mentioned, it was the biggest part of the project, is making sure that we have a framework in there. And even after we built the beta version, we were still learning. So a lot of it was what we knew already, how we do compliance across the rest of our fixed income products, and applying it to this use case. So really taking what you've learned, but applying it in a slightly different context. I think that gets you probably 90% of the way there. The hard last mile is the bit that you don't know, the unknown unknowns, and that took a little bit of trial and error as well, going through things, iterating through them, learning on the job. So I think we did quite a bit to get to the end of beta. We thought we had quite a good compliance framework, and then we gave it to the CEO, and he broke it almost immediately. So, and I think it's trying to think about ways that people may try and break it. So you've almost got to put your hacker hat on and think, what are ways that people may try to get information out? What are the different attack vectors? And really put it under its paces and just try to protect it as much as possible. And I think the way that we've done it in terms of the compliance engine, checking the inputs, checking the query that's generated for the LLM before it's sent, and then checking that before it gets sent out, gives us really 3 layers of checking that, and we're checking for different things at each stage. So I think that you really need a Swiss cheese model of risk to make sure that you have so many layers of protection that even if you have a hole in 1 or 2, you're still going to be protected. So I think that's probably the key thing, is make sure you've got multiple layers of protection.
Can I ask just generally across, the panel at the moment, how is it, if you're working with a new product, how is it possible to anticipate what's going to go wrong with all parts of it? How do you do that?
Ask ChatGPT.
Dan?
Yeah, I think, ask ChatGPT. That's usually the going answer. But I think what I've seen that works is probably a staggered approach. So I think you sort of need to create frameworks that you're confident with, that work. But it's very common to see when either companies or, of any size and scale roll these out, it's usually not out into the open on day one. So you might want to have a more controlled environment, maybe a more contained set of use cases. You test that, you feel comfortable, you open up the controlled environment. So I think a staggered, gradual approach is probably the best way to de-risk this, in my view.
Okay. With something like the FCA, at what stage are you actually getting sight of these new products? Is it when there's a smoking hole in the tarmac?
So it depends. So if a firm comes to our authorizations gateway and they're not yet in the regulatory perimeter, they'll often talk about the things they plan to do. And so we can see that very early. We also have an innovation area that has multiple sandboxes and pathways for firms to really test out the novel. And so we can see those things quite early. And sometimes we see the firms that are already in the perimeter doing interesting things in technology, and so there it comes down to sometimes it's because something's broken and there's been some fallout. At the end of the day, to also try to answer the question, our response would be do your homework. So start by really kicking the tires, looking at everything that could go wrong, do that due diligence. Know the rules, so there are rules that are relevant, know them inside out, and make sure you understand the principles that those are based on. In the UK, we're a principles-based regulator, so that means we care about the customer outcomes most, and we care about the way that you are seeking to comply, often as much as the letter of the law. So we see it in crypto, we'll see it in AI. Some of the rules are just not fit for purpose. They weren't written with the changes in technology in mind. So we recognize that. So tell us what you want to do and why, and what thought you've put behind that, and that goes a really long way. And then, of course, do the homework, like do the testing to make sure that nothing blows up.
Just on the point that you raised around how do you know? Like, there's no rule book. So how do you know before you have launched a product whether or not there are risks involved? I think one other thing could be internal consumption as well. Like if you are a large organization, medium organization, you could actually test it out internally, try to break it like intentionally, and try and see what happens. Probably. But I think that is something that definitely helps. But I would like to play the devil's advocate and also say that sometimes we are too risk-averse and too afraid to actually try out new things. So we need to balance this out. Sometimes, can you really safeguard against complete, that there's never going to be a breakage or there's never going to be a leakage? In spite of all of the controls, we still have problems, don't we, today?
Any thoughts on that, Teana?
Well, I think there's, obviously innovation sandboxes and regulatory sprints that allow us to test ideas, and I think that's one really great tool. The other, I think, is kind of gating alpha and beta launches of things so that you have small cohorts of people, maybe not just your CEO, but a wider variety of people that are looking to basically penetration test your hypothesis. There's obviously different types of white hacker organizations that you can employ that will try and break your toy for you. And all of those things, I think, are down to investment. How much investment do you want to take in the beginning? And I think if we look back at the way that, the whole we're going to innovate and move fast and break things mentality caught us to kind of maybe where we got to in the early, part of the 2000s. Google used to just launch stuff and they would wait for people who used it to tell them things were broken. And I think for some types of technology, that's okay. I think if you're dealing with people's money or financial services, that's probably not a good idea.
Didn't stop Liz Truss. Just a thought, and this is maybe completely left wing, left field rather. If the technology is changing so fast and the use of the technology is changing so fast and the regulations are now becoming, or the reframing of the regulation is now becoming more and more frequent, could you foresee a time where the framing of that legislation was actually partially handed over to AI?
That's directed to me.
You're sitting nearest.
Nothing is impossible, but similarly to launching products without testing, I think that would need a lot of assurances that it's still fit for purpose. I think there are other things that AI can do better first. And then I think even within AI, there's a difference between advisory and control and agency. So I think, if that were to ever happen, I don't have my crystal ball, it would probably start slowly.
I also think when we're thinking about, replacing humans, and Dann, said it well, that human beings have, a rationality and an EQ that perhaps a machine doesn't have. I was speaking with somebody a couple of weeks ago that was trying to teach an AI based on an LLM to feel. And so essentially, obviously machines can't feel, but you can teach them to be repulsed by something. And so they can exhibit things that look like feelings. But, one of the questions that's asked here is AI really unbiased? And I think we can all appreciate that, information in is the information that you're going to get out. One of the big challenges I think that we do have in the regulatory space, especially around emerging technology or anything that is a shift from the status quo, you're always going to have bias. And there are a number of public statements from policymakers around the world that if you take crypto for an example, they just don't like it. And so it becomes a question of, is that the policymaker's role to make decisions based on what they like and they don't like? I would argue no, but it happens, right? People are people, and your biases, whether conscious or unconscious, inform how you make decisions. So I think that would be something that would be potentially a risk at turning over things like regulatory developments and policy development to a machine that also is going to be looking at what happened before. It's working off of data that's known and doesn't necessarily have a view into what potentially technology might be used for in the future.
Okay. Question here from Callan from JP Morgan Chase is, and I'll put this to Dan, is AI investment advice generated in 30 seconds, or 23 in your case, as valuable as advice given by a human analyst after 1 day of research? Would customers pay the same for both?
So wait, 2 questions. Is it as valuable and would they pay the same for both? Let's start with the second. Would they pay the same for both? No. I think we see that online, right? Most people struggle to pay £10 a month for a Spotify subscription because it's digital, but they would pay $10 or $15 a record and buy, 5 or 10 a month. So something about all things digital, which means we think it should be accessible cheaper, which maybe it should be, actually. Will the research be as valuable to them? It depends on the person. If some people gain value into maybe having an analyst on the other side of a call, and there's a price and a value to that, then that works for them. For others that are looking for maybe bite-sized, digestible content and don't want to jump on a call and hear more thorough research every time, it might work for them. So I think it really depends on the person, their approach, and maybe what they feel comfortable with.
Any thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah, I would probably agree. I think in terms of value, I would say AI could actually provide more value based on the data set that it's looking at over there, but then on other occasions I think you're hoping a human would know you better in terms of your risk appetite, what you're interested in investing in, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's pros and cons, and I don't think it's one over the other. I think really the model we're moving to is humans augmented with AI. I think that's where the future is, not one over the other. I don't think it's a choice. I think it's both.
Okay, interesting. Other questions from the floor? Gentleman there in the blue shirt.
Hi, my name's Kurt. I work at Lloyd's Banking Group. I think maybe one for Dan and Michael. Sorry. Dan, you said before that the AI proposition that you're exploring, it's one of the benefits is with a human advisor that maybe can only look into 2 sources versus an AI looking into maybe 12 sources before it gives a recommendation. I guess in the circumstance of a bad outcome to a customer, wrong advice given, with a human you can, I assume you can hold them more to account and question how they formed their decision. So my question is, can you interrogate an AI in the same way? And, especially if you're doing it on a large scale, can you interrogate an AI in the same way and get it to explain how it got to a decision as objectively as you maybe can speaking to a human? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. 2 things. One, just to be clear, as shared in the presentation, the AI research tool that we have in the US Alpha, it does not give recommendations, does not give advice. It just simply provides supporting information for investors to then make their own decisions. That being said, is there a way to challenge, once you get information presented to you, is there a way to challenge it, to query it, to understand where's the information coming from, similar to a conversation with a human being? Depends on the model. So I think if you were to train a model to be more open about its data, its methodologies, I think that's entirely possible. I think there will be a world where maybe some data sets and some methodologies will become proprietary. Therefore, maybe there's a sort of barrier there and it won't be shared out in the open. So I think it really depends on the model. I could see different services going down each route, so some being completely transparent and maybe some having to be a little more discreet or opaque about their data and methodology. Still too early to tell what's the winning formula, but I don't see why not, to answer your question. Now, whether back and forth with a chatbot is as effective to someone as speaking with an advisor that's known them for 20 years or speaking with a friend who's very knowledgeable or a research analyst, I think that depends on your needs and it depends on the person's preference in terms of how they want to collect information. So a bit to Michael's point, I think it's not binary. I think there's a lot of shades here. And I think different solutions will suit different people and different needs.
Of this technological evolution. So if you think about it, there's a lot of discussion about AI versus human, and I think Michael said that before, augmented with human. So taking your example, that when there is somebody who's on the phone talking to you and you have an AI service, how about you provide that AI service directly to that person who's talking to you, and then together, that's a powerful tool. And I think we're kind of going there rather than we are here. There's a lot of kind of let AI take over or replace humans, I think you mentioned as well. I think it's the augmented element that I think will become more and more real and should become more and more real. And whether AI can be explainable, I think it should be. I have a pretty strong opinion on that. I think it must be. There has to be, and it learns, depending on the model, of course, you use. It learns from experiences that you give it. So therefore, you are now into uncharted territory about logical reasoning and why somebody made a decision. So I think that should be explainable, just like you would ask a human to why they arrived at a certain decision making. So yeah, that's what I think.
How do you know you can trust it?
I was just going to say, I think for the moment, I think we need people to be able to validate and experts to be able to validate sometimes the information that comes out of these models because, as Michael said, they do hallucinate. So if you ask a question and typically if it struggles to find the answer that you're looking for, I mean, we've seen numerous researchers and journalists try to aggravate AI and make it mad or ask questions over and over, just berate it until it gets to the answer that you want. And sometimes it will just make stuff up. I mean, there are stories about it making up case law, for example. So, if you were, let's say, a physician and you're using AI in partnership, right? You decide you're going to, souped up version of WebMD, figure out what's wrong with you. You go to the doctor. You say, well, I got this information from WebAI or, an AI tool that's healthcare related. Then ideally, your doctor would know enough to be able to either know that that answer is accurate or be able to go and investigate some of the answers that you got. I could think of, counterindications for medication might be one of those areas. It's hard to know about how every medication out in the world might interact with each other. So I think AI could be a good tool for that. But I think that human interaction, certainly for the next several years, is going to be important to ensure that we don't make mistakes. And I think hallucinations are one of those key areas.
One of my neighbours had a knee replacement quite recently, and he was speaking to the surgeon. He says, I understand you can get this done robotically. The robot will actually go in and do the surgery, and it's done within a very fine tolerance. Should I go down that approach? It may not be possible to irritate AI, but by God, it's possible to irritate surgeons. He says, I've done hundreds of these things. I go, well, fine, okay, well, so I'd have asked him the question after the operation, to be honest. But I'm going to ask this question with a degree of apology, Glenn, because basically there's an anonymous statement coming in the slide of saying the FCA has been described as a hard-working organisation that doesn't have the authority to act.
I said doesn't always.
Sorry?
I said doesn't always.
You said did not.
I said that.
You said that.
They're referring to what I said.
Okay.
But what I said was they don't always have the authority to act.
Okay, well, no, this has come in on Slido.
Yeah, I know.
So maybe a separate thing. It says, why is this the case and how do we empower them?
Yeah, thank you. So it's not necessarily that straightforward. So rules are made by government, and sometimes we can influence those rules and sometimes we can't, and sometimes we wish we had more rules. And so frankly, it's a matter of, we're given the rules, we're given the law by government, and then we make rules based on those. We can't, and frankly, I personally wouldn't want to, regulate everything under the sun. So it's government that dictates to us what our perimeter is, and then within that we can make rules. And so I think crypto is a good example right now. The current crypto legislation that we're working under is the Fifth Money Laundering Directive. That was drafted, I think, in 2019, came into force in 2020, and at that time there was, I think, no real thought about DAOs. DeFi wasn't what it is. NFTs hadn't boomed. And so the regulation wasn't written with that in mind. And there are probably some things that are caught in the regulation that shouldn't be. And so that's, I think, what was meant when it's not that we're impotent, it's that our perimeter just isn't formed perfectly. And that takes time because then we feed back to HMT, and then they, with ministers and government, draft new legislation that goes through parliament, statutory instruments laid and made, and so on. So it just takes time to get there.
But if, as I said earlier, the landscape is evolving, it's changing at an ever-increasing rate, you haven't really got that time. I mean, there's a big gap between your ability to act and the mischief that can happen in the interim.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true, and that's why I think it's actually a very unique asset that we are based on principles regulation. So that means it's not always the letter of the law, it's the outcomes that matter, and those can sometimes supersede the exact letters of the law. So that helps, but yeah, maybe AI will do it all in the future. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Anything else on the floor? Lady there, please.
Thank you. Pardon Benewell, VP at BlackRock. Quick question. So for the like BondGPT and Alpha, so based on OpenAI, so what some considerations you had to take into account regarding accountability of the information being produced by these tools and being consumed by like the users?
Yeah, sure. So one theme that has popped up already once or twice is we're an investment platform. We're not an advisory firm. So it actually does take a lot of work to make sure that you're training a tool like Alpha to provide information, but not to go one step further, right? And the idea is actually we think a tool like this is more powerful because the advantage is its ability to collect data, digest data, and then share it. So we don't really want it to ever go one step further, and we can't, quite frankly, from a regulatory perspective. So I think that was one of the real sort of sensitive areas that we thought, okay, this needs to be really carefully tested. That's a sort of red area that we don't want to trickle into. But otherwise, in terms of accountability, I think there's a degree of testing, quality assurance that you do before these products go into market, but also an ongoing degree of monitoring that needs to happen. I think that's true. Again, back to the principles bit, I mean, we're talking about AI, but I think that goes for any product launch. It's not just about getting it out to market, but then any ongoing research, again, all pointing towards better customer outcomes in the long run. So if I'd say, yeah, one thing was maybe the line between information to advice. We had to be really sure that there was a firm line there and Mitra was properly trained. Then beyond that, going through the normal quality assurance processes and then ongoing monitoring, for sure.
And from my perspective, I would say never trust what comes out of GPT-4. It's based on a lot of data. Public's a black box, so we take the approach that we just don't trust it. So what we have done is put a very strong guardrail in terms of we are not surfacing that data back to the user. What we are doing is combining the query from the user with some other prompt engineering to then ask the LLM how to take that request and structure it in a way to query our databases. When that comes back, we then know enough to say that's a sensible thing or not a sensible thing to surface back to the end client. So essentially, the way we built it has also given us traceability into the why. So we know why we sent something back to the user, but we don't know why the LLM gave us that response, and that's definitely one of the grey areas. So we would never trust blindly the responses that come from a LLM that's based like that. Perhaps one that was a foundation model curated on data that we knew and we were part of, we'd be more comfortable with, but for a large public LLM, definitely not.
You mentioned this in your presentation. The question here is, how do we protect vulnerable customers for over-indexing on the possibly hallucinatory stroke, sometimes overconfident, asserted answers of LLMs? You.
For me.
Michael, for
for me.
For you,
I think, we don't, again, back to that, I think we just don't trust the answers that come back from LLMs. We've got to put some level of control over that to make sure that either it's human or we have the guardrails in place to prevent that. So definitely don't trust it, and do your own analysis. Again, any response that comes back, you should validate what comes back. However you use LLMs, don't just blindly take the response from it. Use it as a point of reference. Go and do some of your own research to validate it. I wouldn't take it as the right answer every time.
I was going to leave that as it was, and then I saw the look on Dee's face. You disagree?
Well, it's not so much that I disagree. What we're really saying, if you think about the last 20, 30 seconds of the conversation, don't trust the LLM. But I'm giving you information. So what do? That's a very simple question that came to my mind. If you don't trust the LLM, and you should not, because until and unless you can explain why the LLM did what it did or showed what it showed, i.e. explain to me what did you interpret? Because if you go back into the code, it's interpreting something from information out there in the web. And I've experienced this myself. When I've asked a question to ChatGPT, the answer came out. And when I went back to the source, I realized that the AI was misinterpreting the source based on just English words, right? So these things can happen. These are very simple things. So it's okay to say that don't trust everything blindly, but then what's the usability? What do you do? So for me, it's a question which goes back behind into this LLM model's code and basically asking the question that you need to explain rather than saying don't trust me blindly. So what do I do?
I think you raised something earlier. When I was a child, when they taught us math, we were challenged to show our work. I don't know if anybody in this room had to show their work, but you had to show how you got to the answer, even if you knew the answer. And so I think that we've seen a shift in the way that people consume information more broadly, right? So if we look at some of the challenges that we have around social media and misinformation, and the concerns that many people have raised around how might AI either, exacerbate that or influence that to, So I think that ultimately, and people ask this question all the time about crypto and vulnerable people and investments and, robo-advisors, and, all of these are tools. Facebook is a tool, it's a communication tool, a robo-advisor is a tool, an LLM is a tool. I think more broadly, one of the things that we can do is put in place these, positive frictions, to use an FCA term, to kind of slow people down so that they can be a little bit more mindful about what they're doing and to exercise some critical thinking. Like, people just don't seem to take the time to do that as much as we used to, just society-wide. So I think that these things are tools, and if we look at them like that, we still need to always apply critical thinking to the decisions that we make.
And just like banks are, taking the example of the financial industry, if the banks are in charge of customers' financial data and assets, and there are regulations to protect those. Bank can't come, for example, in today's day and age and say, well, I don't know how that happened. You can't, that's not an acceptable answer. I think the same thing applies or will apply eventually to some of these models. Whoever is using this model, you can't get away, nothing against you guys, but we can't get away by saying that, I'm not providing any advice or I'm not providing any recommendation. If you're using something and then you're putting a disclaimer saying, don't trust anything that I've said, I think we need to ask that these tools do more. Okay. Yeah, and it needs to go all the way back to where the source of the model is. And maybe they need to show you more exactly why they've arrived at the decision to the human being, because it's so easy to misinterpret information, even though you say, don't trust me,
As Teana said, it's basically, you've got to show you're working. Dan?
I think on this, so the question was, how do you make sure vulnerable customers are negatively impacted by hallucination? So hallucination would be information that is falsely being presented, or an LLM model that's presenting poor information. I think we are overthinking it when our first sort of word to answer that question is AI, LLMs, et cetera. I think if we think of the idea of information being poorly delivered to a customer is not a new problem. Correct. So if you were to go into a mortgage brokerage office or a branch and you say, hey, I'm trying to take a mortgage, and say, okay, these are the rates, and 15 minutes later they realize, oh shoot, I gave the wrong rates. Oh, I looked at last month's sheet for rates, et cetera. That probably happens every day, but it's then the responsibility of the person carrying out that service to say, I need to get in touch with, I've identified I've made a mistake, I need to get in touch with the customer, I need to make sure that mistake is remedied and corrected, and that this customer, whether a regular customer or a vulnerable customer, now has a good idea of what the actual rate is for their mortgage that they came in to ask about. Mm-hmm. It's not so different for AI. I just think we get caught up in fancy buzzwords. Mm-hmm. And so I do see a world where if we do rely more on AI, those are some of the guardrails, is how do you identify that a hallucination did happen? How do you notify a customer afterwards? How do you remedy it as quickly as possible? It's the same problem of providing poor information that we've had for the last 100 or 200 years of financial services. It's just done now in a more dynamic, tech-friendly environment. So I think it's a problem that's already been solved, but we're just going to have to do it in a different format.
I think Teana put her finger on something important, and several people have mentioned it throughout the day, Glenn. The FCA will never have the regulations to protect people from their own lack of patience. Everybody's in a hurry.
Yeah. So we do a lot, Scam Smart, Invest Smart. We try to do a lot to raise consumer awareness. Financial literacy is probably in most countries not where it should be, and sometimes people are their own worst enemy just by being irrational. And that is a part of it. We have a contact center, a supervision hub. We get a huge number of calls from consumers that have had all kinds of terrible things happen to them. And you hear people, they've lost their entire life savings to a scam. And now when they look back, often they're ashamed because hindsight 2020, it was obvious and they should have realized it, but you get overtaken with greed or FOMO or the quick win. That's a real element. So our rules are there to try to make sure that firms and the providers of these services are doing everything reasonable to make the choices clear to consumers. At the end of the day, you can't guard against everything, but we try to do as much as we can to make sure that the reasonable steps are taken.
Indeed. I'm actually going to round it up there. We've had literally dozens of questions on Slido that we haven't got time to go through. So my apologies for that. But can I ask you to thank our speakers again this afternoon one more time? I have to say a big thank you to all our speakers today. I think they've been uniformly excellent. I hope you found it instructive and a useful use of your time. Thanks very much to our conference partners, our exhibitors and our sponsors too. As was said this morning, essentially without the sponsors we can't offer these as free at the door. So we do owe them a great deal. Those badges around your necks, by all means take it home if you want as a souvenir, but if you leave them at the desk, Digit will recycle them. I've got a big bowl of the things at home. It's a complete waste of time. There's a drinks reception now in the Stratosphere, sponsored by F5. Stay and join that if you can. There is a conference survey. I know there's always a conference survey, but this is an important one. Give us your feedback. It doesn't matter whether it's positive, negative, indifferent, whatever it is. If it will help to structure a better conference next time round, Digit wants to hear about it, and that's a genuine statement. They do go through them all. It matters, and they try and if there's anything can be tweaked to improve, they're on it. It'll be sent to you by email post-event. Get involved. There's an opportunity in the survey to put yourself or your organisation, or indeed the person sitting next to you, forward as a possible speaker at future events. And we're always keen to extend our pool of speakers, so let us know. Briefly, next 3 events are Financial Technology Awards on the 12th of October, Dynamic Earth. It's going to be hosted by Fred Macaulay this year. Apparently it's quite amusing. It's always a good night and a great chance to meet people from the sector. Digital Transformation is on the 26th of October here, and Digit Expos on the 23rd of November at the EICC. It's huge. If you want to meet people, that's the one to go to. Well over 1,000 people last year, all of them hot to trot. Details on all these events can be found on the Digit website at www.digit.fyi. As I say, there's a drinks reception now upstairs, kindly sponsored by F5. Join it if you will. If you are going home, however, a safe journey home, and thank you for your attention. Good afternoon.